So our next speaker is Sofia Duarte. She is concluding a PhD studies in the doctoral program in language, literature, and culture, and its applications at the University of Valencia in Spain. Her research revolves around the interdisciplinary field of animal studies, a critical framework that in her PhD thesis she is applying for the interpretation of Margaret Atwood's works and the presence of non-human animals in them. Additionally, she worked on the portrayal of non-human animals in the X-Men comics in her master's thesis. She is part of the research group named Animals in Literary and Visual Cultures from Equilibrium. So whenever you want, Sofia, you can begin.
Right. Well, thank you, the organizers, for allowing me to present my paper here. Can you hear me properly, or just tell me, okay? No. So as you can see today, I'm going to be talking about According to the Galaxy Volume 3. And what I want to show is, or I want to discuss, is the ethics of animal experimentation in relation to this film, and how this type of film, these type of franchises can help us produce popular culture that aims to entertain, but also to question the ethical standpoints of those viewers that go and see the film. So I'm going to very briefly go over the history of animal experimentation, literally like 1 minute of it. So we have that records show that non-human animals have been used for experimentation throughout centuries. We have possibly one of the biggest figure that everybody knows about is Descartes and his perception of non-human animals as being mere machines, automatas. Then we have a bit later on the anti-vivisection movement led by women primarily in the 19th century, particularly in the States and in Britain, and how this started to open up the conversation and try to question if this was correct or not. And possibly within the recent years, one of the key works is William Russell's and Rexford's The Principles of Humane Experimental Technique, where what they do is they try to propose a more humane approach towards animal experimentation, which includes the 3 R's of experimentation that we have talked about around the day today, which are replacement, reduction, and refinement. However, the problem is that there's still a big part of the population, that believes that non-human animals are insignificant compared to the benefits that we can obtain from them, as Kianya now explained. And there's this there's a questioning of the moral status that non-human animals have. But as we have seen here, and I think we all agree on, there are others who believe that non-human animals are equal to humans and that they should be treated with the same respect. And this includes not forcing them into, and I quote, any service or kill them or use them for the interest of us. And also it must be kept in mind that, quote, animal subjects are incapable of providing informed consent of involvement in research studies. We have non-human animals, as we talked about today in the morning. They suffer when they're used for experimentation. They experience fear, pain, depression, anxiety, and even post-traumatic stress disorder. So if we take into account all of this, one can only question why there's more than 50 million animals used in experiments each year in the United States and 8 million in Europe. So you have here some of the statistics, but the ones from the States do not include mice, rats, crabs, fish, frogs, octopuses, turtles, and birds. They're not covered in those statistics. So there's a big number of species that are not included there. And the ones that we do have here, also we take into account the baboons, cats, cows, dogs, ferrets, guinea pigs, hamsters, horses, monkey, owls, pig, rabbits, and sheep. So we have a wide array of non-human animals that we exploit, but that most often than not we chose to ignore and not take into consideration. What is more, these non-human animals, once not only are they experimented on, but they have no afterlife. I believe that now in the United States, there are 5 foreign states for these non-human animals to be able to be adopted or taken into sanctuaries, but this is only a few states, and knowing how the United States is, I doubt that will work very well. And even then, they are animals that will suffer throughout their whole life due to what they have experienced. They will have traumatic trauma and other illnesses. And well, within recent years, we have like two big standpoints, which are animal welfare and animal rights, are the possibly most important ethical approaches towards this. So we have from on the one side Singer, who he defines more of the principle of equal consideration of the interests of animals, and that the criterion of sentience should be what guides us, and who is deserving or worthy of having preferences and who isn't. But we also have those, for example, Tom Regan or Gary Granchanicki are against this and who believe that all non-human animals have the right to not be treated as means to an end. And Granchanicki, we have this quote here that you can see. So he questions that, and he opposes to the use of non-human animals, whether for food, experimentation, or entertainment. And he asks, why do we deem it acceptable to eat animals, hunt them, confine them, and display them in circuses and zoos, use them in experiments or rodeos, or otherwise treat them in ways in which we would never think it appropriate to treat any human, irrespective of how humane we were being. So I would argue that popular culture can open up this discussion to those who maybe are not so conscious about this, that maybe you go see a film that you have no idea about the whole animal movement, but it can be a way of starting the discussion. So if we look into popular culture and animal welfare, we have that debates regarding this have been present practically since the beginning. We have a canonical example of Black Beauty, a book written in 1877, but we also have, if we take into consideration films, all the ones that we have here are the most important ones. So we have in these examples how non-human animals are employed in wars, entertainment, food consumption, or experimentation, and how they are questioned. Malamud argues, and I quote, that animals in visual culture are often disguised in some way, costume or mask or disorder or disfigure. And this prevents us from seeing the authentic animal beneath the cultural flippering. Animals are disguised perhaps because the authentic animal would be too depressing or too scary or too boring for the viewer to observe. So all these films, sure, they talk about the problem, but always from a very Disney-fied version, like you said today in the morning. Here's the thing, like if we look at the list that I have here, most of them tend to be aimed for kids. So again, it's very, very light, the debate that they open. However, we have a few examples in recent years, for example, the Rise of the Planet of the Apes or Outcast, which are more aimed towards a wider audience. And this can help open up the debate and explore the theme in a more graphic, I would say, way, and discuss it in a different style. For example, in Finding Nemo, we're not gonna talk about it the same way as with an adult audience. And this is where Guardians of the Galaxy comes. I'm gonna talk about it like you haven't seen it, so I don't know if all of you are have you seen it, but if not, I'm gonna go over it again. So this is part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's directed by James Gunn. We have Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 1 and 2 from 2014 and 2017. And you can see that basically it's a film of a group of outcast heroes who try to save the different galaxies of the current universe. And the thing is that they're all outcasts, and we have these are the members. So you have Star-Lord, Mantis, Nebula, Drax, Groot, and the one I'm going to be talking about, Rocket, which is the raccoon that we have here, who is voiced by Bradley Cooper. From the picture, you can already tell that he's capable of handling guns, totally normal for a raccoon, obviously. We also have him posing as a bipedal animal on his 2 feet, which is also strange considering that raccoons mostly known for. And an ongoing joke throughout the 3 films is that he's called a raccoon, but he denies this. He says that he is not, that he gets angry with this, and all the characters are not really aware of what he is. And what started out what seemingly like a joke suddenly becomes a disturbing statement because we realize that he does not know who he is really. That's what he denies it. And so he denies his own identity. So this third volume, which is the one I'm going to talk about today, focuses on Rocket's origin story and his transformation from a common raccoon to one that has been bioengineered to please the needs of a superior godlike being known as the High Evolutionary, which is basically the evil one in the film. Okay. So we discovered that he's part of what is known as batch 89, which I will show you in the next picture, this next slide. A group of non-human animals that were experimented on by this High Evolutionary, who seeks to create the perfect planet with the perfect species, the perfect beings. Just like in real life with a normal raccoon, he is taken from his home as a kid. And during his forest moments of night, he is experimented on. And the third film opens up with this harrowing scene. It's a way of displaying directly what non-human animals were experimented on lived through and how they only know about being caged throughout their whole life. Moreover, we have one of the important instances, and I'm going to come back to this again later on, is that he is referred to as P13. So he's just a number, nothing more, by High Evolutionary. So we have that this motion picture shows a candid description of the cruelty that non-human animals endure when they're employed in vivisection, and he seems to criticize the anthropocentrism of this, as we're gonna see, because it's not only Rocket that's being experimented on. So here we have batch 89. So you can see that all of these are non-human animals that are taking place, that have been used to take place in the trial. And they are also placed alongside the cages of Rocket. So we have Lila, she's an otter that we see on the top. We have Flower, the rabbit, here at the bottom. And we also have Teeps, which is the walrus, that we have up there. And you can see from the images that they're almost more machine than animals. They're described as being, and I quote, the result of illegal genetic and cybernetics experiments on a lower life form, and that's the important lower life form, and classified as habor. In theory, these experiments that they have to endure are used to enhance their intellect, their strength, their durability, their agility, and the senses of the regular counterparts of the non-human animal. So each animal will have a sense that is more developed, and with this, it will be even better. And throughout their shared trauma and the time they spend together, very brief, but the time they do spend together, is they dream about being free of seeing the sky. And I'm sorry for the spoilers, but they don't achieve it. It's not gonna happen. So, according to Spiegel, and I quote, the term vivisection means life dissection, but has come to be used to define any experiment performed on a living creature, human or non-human. This includes burning, freezing, non-therapeutic operations, disease studies, which involve inducing disease in a healthy individual, psychological experiments, drug testing, and virtually any other procedure which involves tinkering with someone's life in a non-therapeutic manner. So this is from real world, and we have here shown it in a fictional world where it seems to be a scandal. The pain that these non-human animals endure is portrayed throughout the film, especially when we see a young Rocket coming back to his cage. First we see him being strapped on a restraining device, which is very similar to ones that they use on apes to experiment on. And then we deduce, because the scene cuts there, that he's having his scalp open, and we see a little bit of blood dripping. So we do not actually see the main moment of the procedure, but we have the fear that he feels before and the pain that he feels after. And I think this is one of the important things that I want to highlight about the film, is that Gunn could have profited from showing the cruelty and all, and very explicitly. But he avoids what Donovan coins as aestheticizing animal cruelty. Instead, he seems to place the focus on the pain, on the suffering of the non-human animal, but how he feels it, not the moment of itself. And so we also see that throughout the film, the focus is mostly on how they feel, how Rocket and his other companions, their sentiency. So instead of focusing on the humans and the evil ones, we have to focus on the non-human animals. And so the aim of the test that the High Evolutionary is carrying out is, and I quote, to take an imperfect clump of biological matter and transform it into something perfect in order to live in a new planet known as the counter-Earth. So the experiments that are carried out are simply a procedure to be used, and I quote again, on creatures that truly matter. And once they are no longer of use, they will be thrown away. So although we're talking about a fictional movie, it's exactly the same thing that we see with non-human animals in real life. They're experimented on so that we can, whatever benefits we obtain can be used on humans. If there is any profit for non-human animals, great, but that's not usually the objective. The objective is to improve humans' life. Again, we see that the High Evolutionary, I have a picture of him in the next picture. He is practically godlike, but you see him and he looks very human. So again, we see here the coincidence. I'll leave it up to you to think about it. And so we also see that the superiority of the human in when Rocket asked if he can go to this new planet, and the High Evolutionary replies that if he thinks that he has some worth in and of yourself without him. So again, his life depends on the human. Again, with the animals that we experiment on, we have the same problem. It's their lives depends on the humans, not on themselves. And another thing that I want to highlight is that the High Evolutionary is quite hidden throughout the whole film. They have very difficult time finding it, just like laboratories and other facilities, which are usually not explicitly seen. I don't think most of us have actually been to one, come across to one in our daily life, unless we have willingly gone to it. So another thing that we see, another instance, that we see in the film is that of Laika. So in the film we have Cosmo, which is the doggy that we have up here, and she's a direct association with Laika, and she has not been experimented on by the High Evolutionary, but by humans, actual humans like us. And she states that the humans sent her into space and they fully knew that she would never return and die in a fiery ball of death. But since it was a scientific experiment, then it seemed to be ethically justifiable. And PETA explains that in Laika, the dog, I believe most of you are familiar with her story, but her training included being, and I quote, being spun in a centrifuge, confined to pressure chambers, locked inside progressively in smaller cages, and during the launch, her pulse shot up 3 times to its normal rate, and she was so terrified that it remained elevated for an extended time. Temperature inside the tiny spacecraft quickly soared, and within hours, she cooked to death, literally cooked to death, all alone and in severe pain. So we have here Cosmos is a character who has been in Marvel's universe for a long time. But James Gunn made sure to have her here talking, and one of the instances that she does talk is to make sure to mention this instance. So I want to quote Malloy here that she argues that our own humanity is perpetually structured through our relationships with other human animals, and I believe that Laika or Cosmo is a perfect example of how our lack of empathy towards non-human animals that are experimented on reveal exactly how we feel, so what kind of humans we are. So, another instance that I want to talk about is the fact that, James Gunn seems to highlight the fact that they're not simply numbers, but they're living beings, individuals. So what I want, one of the important aspects is that we have a raccoon being the protagonist. So, I know raccoons, at least for me, they're very adorable. But if we take into account the American and Canadian context, they're liminal animals because they're not considered companion animals in theory and seen mostly as part of the American wildlife, but they also have become accustomed to being next to humans and even rely on them to feed and or even obtain shelter. So this has caused them to be seen as a vermin by some. And Daniel Justice argues that when these non-human animals are categorized as vermin, their behavior sets them outside the norms and humans seem appropriate. When animals intrude on our projected boundaries of body and home, impinge upon our livelihoods and industries, or violate their sense of natural order, they enter the category of vermin and are thereby sentenced to death for presumed crimes against human interests. So the empathy that we feel towards Rocket throughout the film, with maybe a dog or a cat, would have been easily achieved, but with a raccoon, that means that there's an extra barrier that is set upon. And especially being a vermin, considered a vermin, this makes it even more easy to justify the ethical implications, the ability to experiment on them. So we see that Gunn seems to argue that even those who can be considered vermin are also worthy of a moral status and protection. This notion seems to be further explained with the idea that they are able to talk. And one of the first words, actually the first word that we hear Rocket saying is simply hurts. So we have that Gunn not only, so he chooses the word hurts, which implies that Rocket is capable of feeling, he is capable of suffering, to be his first words. He could have chosen anything, but we have something that relies that demonstrates their sentiency. And when this takes us back to the first film, where Rocket at some point in the film states that he didn't ask to get made, it didn't ask to be torn apart and put together over and over and turned into some little monster. So everything now makes sense in this third film of why he has seen himself that way throughout the other films and to the previous ones. Another important aspect of being able to talk is the ability to choose their name. So we have Lila, she states that she has been thinking that A9Q12 is not really a name. So I would like my name to be, and there's the scene that each one of them proceeds to choose their own name. So it's each one of them who decides it. And I think this kind of resembles the biblical moment of Adam deciding and imposing the names on non-human animals. But here we have them being the ones that decided. And I think it kind of symbolizes also the Ursula Le Guin's story of she unnames them. So they decide to reject their number and have their own name, their own individuality, and decide who they want to be. So they're no longer an ID number, but sentient beings. And well, we also have that there are other non-human animals, as the ones that we see here at the top, which are considered humanimals. And then we also have, here you can see the High Evolutionary in the second image, who also suffer become part of the experiments that the High Evolutionary takes over throughout the film. And so we have to remember what Donello says, that these animals never live in a home, they also never get a name, they are objects, not subjects, they have no history, no biography, no intentions, and no emotions. They live in a space where they are crowded with others, reducing their individuality, they're rarely, when necessary, reducing an emotional connection. If necessary, they're giving numbers that are used to refer to them, but not address them. They do not feel the pain, so they are not anesthetized or killed with humane methods, and they have no agency, no ability to control their own lives, and ultimately they're simply products. So we have this, we have that Gunn shows this throughout the story of Duarte. With this, I'm almost concluding. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is the kinship and otherness that we find throughout the film. So, it's in towards the end of the film, we have that the spaceship where the High Evolutionary is, it's about to explode, and that includes all the living beings that are inside this spaceship are going to die. So the Guardians of the Galaxy appear and decide to save them. But who are they going to save? So in first instance, okay, the ones that they save first is the ones that we have in the second image, which, well, kind of surprise, they're very human. They're not technically they're not humans, but physically yes, they look like one. And we have here at the end of the film that it's Rocket, the one that says finds that there's a room full of other raccoons and other non-human animals that were experimented on or were about to. And he argues with the other guardians of the galaxy that they need to be saved too, that they deserve. If he's a guardian of the galaxy, he's a member. The other ones deserve to have the same future. They have to be able to decide what they want. And this shows that there's certain instances of speciesism, even within the guardians, who see Rocket as a being that is worthy of a moral status, but others who are exactly like him do not, or other non-human animals. And this happens also with other several creatures, non-human animals. They're not exactly, they're still in the analogy here. I'm still trying to find the adequate word for them. But we have the animals that we see at the top, which are saved by Mantis, which is one of the aliens that we have in the first, and she's a woman, and she has also been othered. So we see that she's one of the only ones that actually finds kinship with them. It seems that since she has been othered, she understands their pain, and that's why she decides to save them. The same thing happens with Clark, which is the second one we have in the second image, who is also saved thanks to, but again, a human, or superhuman, but what I mean is the human figure. And then we also have the Lamshan, which is the one we have here at the bottom. We only see him very briefly, but I wanted to include these three images because we see that not all of them are the typical cute, adorable, non-human animal that we have to save, but they're species that are completely different that more likely than not, people will not emphasize with. But here we have Gunn saying that they all deserve to be saved. So we have that, and I quote your Tiffin, that humans are presented as individual worthy of moral concern, but non-human others, most of the time, are presented as a collectivity or a vested species to be preserved or eradicated at human will. So although the High Evolutionary is defeated, it's still up to the Guardians of the Galaxy, mostly made up by humans, who are the ones that decide that they deserve to live. So we see here there's some contradictions between one instance and the other of the film. And okay, here I'm going to conclude. So basically what I wanted to show very briefly is that popular culture can become a means through which non-human animals are represented and their needs can be discussed. And not only this can be done through documentaries, which might not reach all audiences, but also through popular culture, especially taking into consideration that this is one of the biggest franchises that's seen throughout the whole world. So even if you're not a fan, you might have heard of it. So this means reaching a wider audience and opening the discussions to people that might have never even thought about it, about this problem that we live with. It has been greatly, the film has been greatly praised by PETA and the animal movement for its message against animal experimentation, the way that it deals with it. And of course, the film has its flaws, and it could be portray the message a bit better, but at least it shows that we can overcome more anthropocentrism, our speciesism, and form a kinship with other species. And I wanted to end with this quote by Walker, which states that, and I quote, "We are guilty, but that is not is only a first response, a normal. What we do with our heightened consciousness is the question." So after finishing watching this film, if we at least get one person to start questioning the ethical status of non-human animals, at least it's a good way to start the discussion and maybe change one person's mind, at least one. So that is all. Do you have my website? Thank you for listening.